tonight we are going to do part one of the best tomato sandwich recipe. And what that entails is we're going to make our own bread as well as our own mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is not as hard as you think, and actually this bread is super simple as well. So to get started, you are going to need a bowl, you're going to need a whisk, and you're going to need a loaf pan that is either lined with parchment paper, or I have this stuff that's kind of like reusable parchment paper that I don't throw away. It's not exactly silicone. Honestly, I don't know what it is, but it's what I line my pans with so that the bread does not stick. You're also going to need an immersion blender. A regular blender could work. It just makes a mess, and then you have to get the mayonnaise out. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the mayo in the same jar that we're going to store it in. So you will need a jar for that as well. Okay, so part one of the best tomato sandwich. What you need is actually not chickpeas, but you need the chickpea brine or the aquafaba. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to pour this. I've got a little colander right over the bowl, and I'm just going to pour that right in so that I can separate the aquafaba, the bean water, from the beans. All right? And then we're just going to set that to the side and let that drip. Okay, so after that, we do want to make sure that we preheat our oven to 400 degrees. This bread is going to bake at 400 degrees. And tonight, when the class is over, you will have one finished product. The mayo will be good to go in the refrigerator and start using very soon. The bread will still be baking. So I made up a book earlier so that you can actually see the finished product, and I'll show you how to cut it. It's really important to let the bread cool before you start cutting it so it doesn't fall apart, okay? So we've got our oven preheated, and we've got our chickpeas draining. Something that you can do with these chickpeas later is you can either turn them into a hummus, throw them in salad, throw them in a soup, or you can use a little olive oil, salt, and pepper, and roast them up and make a nice crispy snack for later. Whatever you do, don't throw them away after you use the liquid, okay? So we are going to start now with our bread recipe. And this recipe, I can't say it's a no-need recipe because we will be needing it for a short little while, but it is going to have some ingredients maybe a little bit different than what you're used to. So we're going to have almond flour, not almond meal, but almond flour. We're also going to need some coconut flour. We're going to need some psyllium husk. Sometimes it's called psyllium husk powder. Sometimes it's called ground psyllium husk. And this is sort of what helps bind it all together. And then we're going to need some ground flax as well. Now this is just my flaxseed that I grind up myself. Nothing special there. All right, we're also going to need a little baking powder, a little salt, a little olive oil, and a little apple cider vinegar. And the oil, apple cider vinegar, and the salt are going to be used along with the chickpea brine called alfalfa and ground mustard for the mayo. So a little overlap of the recipes. All right. So here at VegeCooking, it's really important that we teach you certain skills in the kitchen. We're going to have our hair up out of the way so we don't get hair in our food. We're going to make sure we've washed our hands for 20 seconds in hot soapy water, tops, bottoms, in between, and around those thumbs. You can sing ABCs or happy birthday twice to help you remember that. And we try our best to take care of our earth. We shouldn't really have a lot of scraps tonight. We're not going to be cutting the ends off of anything, and we're going to keep the peas for something else. So we're not going to have any scraps. When we do, we either compost them or we feed them to our piggies. So we want to take care of our earth in that way, and then we also use real dishes as often as possible to make less waste. But let's get started so that we have enough time to get this recipe made, okay? So we're going to start by putting our dry ingredients into a bowl. And we're going to need 2.5 cups of almond flour. That's 2.5 cups. So I've got 1 cup. And I've got 2 cups. Now I am running a little low. So I'm going to make a little adjustment that I've done before. But I need you, for the first time, for the best results, you want 2.5 cups. And it looks like I have just at 2 cups. So one variation you can try is 2 cups of almond flour and 1 cup of coconut flour. But what it calls for is 2.5 cups of almond and a half a cup of coconut. And that really will give you your best results, And go. All right. 2.5 cups of almond flour. And then you're going to need a half of a cup of coconut flour. A half of a cup of coconut flour. Getting down to the bottom of just about everything. Just a quick recap because someone just joined us. We drained our chickpeas, so we're separating the aquafaba, the chickpea brine, from the chickpeas. We have 2.5 cups of almond flour in our bowl, and we have a half a cup of coconut flour. Okay. So if you need to catch up, that's fine. But that's what we have in our bowl so far. 2.5 cups of almond flour, a half a cup of coconut flour. The next thing that we're going to need is 1/3 of a cup of ground flax seed. 1/3 of a cup of ground flax seed. Okay. Then we're going to need 1/3 of a cup plus 2 tablespoons of that psyllium husk, ground psyllium husk or psyllium husk powder. The flaxseed and the psyllium husk are what are binding this together. And although these may be some different ingredients than what you are used to, I get them on Amazon. So we have 1/3 of a cup of psyllium husk flour plus an additional 2 tablespoons. I'm telling you, this may seem a little weird, these ingredients, but this bread is so good. I cannot wait to show you the finished product and for you to taste it. I really like it. And it is really, really simple. So we put all of our dry ingredients, oh, nope, not yet. We still have baking powder to go, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, and then 1 1/4 teaspoons of sea salt. So we are adding all of our dry ingredients first to the bowl. Okay, so that was 1 tablespoon of just simple baking powder and 1/4 teaspoons of salt. 1 and 1/4. All right. So we have a big pile of dry ingredients that we're just going to whisk together to get stirred up nicely. We want that baking powder and the salt to sort of be incorporated all through the almond flour and the psyllium husk and the coconut flour. So there are our dried ingredients. All right, just that quick and simple. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our wet ingredients. We're going to use 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, and then 2 cups of lukewarm water. It said think like bath water. So I put this in the microwave a little bit earlier, but then I've let it cool down a little bit. So it is warm to the touch, but obviously not too warm. You just saw me stick my finger in there. My nice clean finger. All right. And so it doesn't really matter how you do this, but I personally like to add the olive oil first. Now this could be whatever oil you would like. I happen to like olive oil, and I will be using it in both recipes tonight. So you're going to be amazed at how easy this bread recipe is. So we've got 2 tablespoons of olive oil. I don't want to make it spill, so I'm going to close it back up. And then 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. I think it's really important to get the apple cider vinegar with the mother because it's really good for your gut and digestion. It helps promote those good flora and the good bacteria in your gut to help aid digestion. So 1 tablespoon of the apple cider vinegar, and then 2 cups of warm water. Now, I try not to add all of it at once, but about 3/4 of it at first. Give this a nice stir, and you're going to see it's going to come together in a dough-like form fairly quickly. And add in a little more. In just a minute, we're going to start kneading. Make sure your oven is preheated to 400. And it's looking a little bit like beach sand, so we're definitely going to need all the water. I just like to be a little bit reserved at first, just in case. So, give that a good stir. This is where you get a little bit of a workout when in your kitchen. Baking always seems to be that for me anyway. So, it starts to kind of pull away from the spoon and clump up. I don't know if you can really see that or not, but I want to get that little bit more oil out of that spoon right there. And then I'm just going to take it and I'm going to start kneading it. Make sure you don't have any rings on your hands as you start kneading it. I'm going to bring it closer to the camera. You can kind of see what it looks like. It's a little sticky, but it's not really sticking to my hands that much. As I knead it, it's going to get a little drier. And I just want to knead this for about 2 minutes just to get it really good and incorporated. I see some dry flour on the bottom, so I want to get in there and get that incorporated in. And if it starts getting too dry, we may need to add just a little bit more water. But I have this technique where I kind of pick it up and push it in on itself. Again, I'm going to get the rest of that oil out and get the rest of that water out of there. And then just start kneading it in the bowl. No need to flour the counter and make too much of a mess. Just want this to all come together, and as you can see, I can kind of pick it up. It's almost all incorporated, and there's a little sticking to my hands, but not much, so that's pretty normal. Then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start to shape it. I'm not quite done yet. I'm just going to start to shape it into somewhat of a loaf shape. You don't have to be exact here, but and then I'm going to let this sit for at least 10 minutes. We're going to just put that over to the side. Sometimes I like to put it in my microwave just to kind of get it out of the way. All right, but guess what, guys? Other than just a few little things and then putting it in the oven, we're almost done with the bread. So it was that quick, that simple. So what we're doing right now is we're letting it sort of rest so that all the fibers can absorb all the liquids and really become more of a loaf. And so now what we're going to do is make our homemade mayo. And so if you remember, I said we were going to need a jar. Now, you can do this in the blender, but I just like doing it in the very jar that I'm going to store it in. Makes it less clean up and everything. So my blender, putting mayo in a blender would really make quite the mess. So I'm just going to use my immersion blender. Okay, and then let me pull up that recipe. And I'm going to show you that recipe. I'm going to try to. There we go. All right, there is our bread recipe. Super, super simple. okay? 2.5 cups of almond flour, half a cup of coconut flour, a third of a cup of flax meal, which is just ground flaxseed, a third of a cup plus 2 tablespoons ground psyllium husk, 1 tablespoon baking powder, 1 1/4 teaspoon salt, 2 tablespoons olive oil, 1 tablespoon apple cider vinegar, and 2 cups of lukewarm water. Then you stir it up, then knead it up, and then you let it rest for 10 minutes. Now let's move on to our mayo. All right, so again, we have our jar. We have apple cider vinegar. We have some ground mustard. We have that salt once more. And then it says 3 tablespoons of liquid from the chickpeas. And it says 3/4 to 1 cup of neutral tasting oil. I really like using olive oil. I don't think it's really a neutral tasting oil. I like that, but you can use whichever oil you prefer. It says grapeseed oil. It can be avocado oil. That's a really popular one to use as well. But I have my chickpeas that have drained. And remember, we're not throwing out the chickpeas. We're keeping those to add to our salads, or maybe make a hummus, or even make a crispy chickpea snack. Rub a little olive oil, salt, pepper, maybe garlic, or whatever spices you'd like, and then throw those in the oven until they're crispy. They're super tasty. All right. We're going to start with everything except the olive oil. I knew there was something I had to leave out of there. So here we go. 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. All right. 1/2 of a teaspoon of ground mustard. Now, I dare say you could probably just use prepared mustard as well, but we're going to go by the recipe tonight and use ground mustard. 1/2 teaspoon ground mustard. 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And 3 tablespoons of our chickpea liquid that I drained out. Now, I've used the chickpea liquid when I make my own chickpeas. This happened to be out of a can to make it a little easier tonight. But basically, you can do all sort of stuff with this. It's called aquafaba, one. And I have used this as an egg substitute for many, many things. I've made marshmallows with it. I've made meringue with it. I've baked with it. But I only needed 3. So you may or may not put the rest of this back in a jar with chickpeas to save for later. But what I like to do is I like to put it in ice cube trays, 1 tablespoon in each little section, and freeze it so that it doesn't go bad and I can use it for all kind of things. We're going to start using the immersion blender and pour in the oil as we go. Now, I like to do about 1/4 of a cup at a time because sometimes you don't need as much as it calls for. It just kind of depends. Like baking, kind of depends on the weather and so many different things. But I'm going to get my immersion blender and I'm going to just start blending. While I'm blending, I'm pouring the oil in slowly. In case you didn't know, all mayo is egg, oil, salt, and spices. After that chickpea brine was our egg replacement, I think I'm probably going to need 1/2 cup. The way that you tell, let me share that screen with you one more time and show you how you're going to tell when it is ready. So it says using an immersion blender in a small bowl, which I just used it in a jar, okay? So you're going to blend until it just starts to thicken. Now right now it's still falling off, it's thicker, but it's still pretty watery. And then it says, with the immersion blender running, slowly drizzle in the oil, 1/4 of a cup at a time, like I just said. The mixture will start to become very thick and you will need to move the immersion blender around, right? When you can pick up the immersion blender and it doesn't just slide right off, you're done, and you'll put it in the refrigerator and it will continue to thicken. All right, so I don't have quite enough oil in there yet, so here goes again. See if I can come any closer to the camera so you can see. It is definitely starting to thicken up, but it still slides off. And looks like I'm going to need just a little more oil, but I don't think a lot. Okay, do you see now? It's not just falling right off. I mean, it's sliding off, but that's what mayo does. All right. And again, that quick, that simple, and we have our own totally healthy mayo. Now, you'll notice that it doesn't make a whole lot. And that's good because this doesn't have all the preservatives and everything. It kind of is up on the side a little bit, but it's really only about that much. This doesn't make a whole lot, but you don't want it to make a whole lot. So our bread needs to be finished up, but our mayo is now done. We're just going to put a top on that, put that in the refrigerator. And now I'm going to get it back out. So what I did after I was done kneading it is I kind of shaped it into the shape of a loaf. Now in the bowl, it kind of got bent up again, but I'm just going to reshape that. Now my little pan, it's not exactly loaf pan. This is a toaster oven loaf pan, and it's just perfect for this size loaf. So yours might be a little bit bigger, but I'm going to wet my hands a little, and I'm just going to rub them over the surface of the bread to kind of smooth it out because it's a little bit bumpy where some of the pieces went together. So again, I'm going to try to come up closer to see. Just kind of smoothing it out, making it into a loaf shape. So although we did put some baking powder in it, it will rise a little bit, but it's not going to rise a lot. So I want my loaf, whatever shape I want my bread, is what I need my loaf to be in. And it fits just perfectly in my parchment lined toaster oven loaf pan. All right, and then take a little bit more water, rub that. And voila. Okay, so here's my loaf in my little pan. And the last thing that I want to do, I have found with a little trial and error, this bread is going to bake at 400 degrees for at least 55 minutes. It may take a little longer, but what I find is when I just put it into the oven, it gets a little browner than I want it to be. So I'm going to just take a piece of foil and I'm going to cover the bread, and for the first 30 minutes in the oven, it will have the foil on it. For the last 25 minutes, I take the foil off and let it brown. And then if I need to cook it a little bit longer, I will put the foil back on. You may need to cook it for an additional 20 minutes. Now, how are you going to know if you need to cook it for an additional 20 minutes? We have this amazing tool called a toothpick, and you're just going to poke it in, and you're going to see if it comes out clean. I try to poke it in a couple of different areas just to make sure. But guys, you're going to bake this 30 minutes covered, another 25 minutes uncovered at 400 degrees, and then possibly up to another 20 minutes covered so it doesn't turn too brown. But let me show you. I made one earlier today so that you could see it, the done product, because I knew we wouldn't have time tonight to wait around for 50 minutes or more. And so this is my finished product. Now, I've actually already cut 4 pieces off because I had to try it, right? But I wanted to show you that it comes out in a very nice loaf. It's very, very brown because of that 25 minutes. It gets a little too brown if I keep it uncovered. I want to show you how nicely this slices, And you should be, I've already gotten 4 pieces off of this. The recipe says you can cut it into 16. I don't know if I can do that or not, but I'm just going to slice it about like what I would think a piece of bread thickness should be. It slices very nicely if you let it cool, and it holds its shape. If you do not let it cool for at least 3 hours, it will fall apart. It will not hold its shape. You can see this is a small loaf, showing you according to my hand. So I always cut my sandwiches in half anyway. We have an amazing plant-based, gluten-free, totally delicious bread here that I can slice up and put on and make a sandwich. I have some delicious mayo that I made on my own, and I do suggest tasting it. See if you need a little extra. Tastes like mayo to me. All right, and there we have it. Thank you so much for joining me for part 1 of the best tomato sandwich. We all know here in the South you need at least bread and mayo for a tomato sandwich. And Wednesday, I'm going to show you the next piece to go over the top with deliciousness for the best tomato sandwich. This is going to be a staple for your summer and beyond. Thank you for joining me. Have a great night. Learn to cook, love your veggies, and happy cooking. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm not sure where you are or when you're watching this, but I want to make sure I cover everyone. Welcome to the best tomato sandwich part 2. We did part 1 earlier in the week where we made our own bread and our own mayo. And now tonight we are going to put it together. We all know, if we're from the South, we know that a good tomato sandwich is a good bread, good mayo, good tomato, a little salt, and I don't know about you, but I love a lot of pepper. And so usually I keep it pretty simple, but the other day I discovered this addition that just puts it over the top. So you'll just need your favorite bread, whether you made it with us the other night or your own favorite bread. You're going to need your favorite mayo, whether you made it with us or you bought it from the store, whatever the case may be. You are going to, of course, need a tomato. A very small thing that you can add that adds a lot of extra flavor is fresh basil, which I don't know if you know this, but it used to be ground up and used to help insect bites, to remove the sting. And so basil can be not only super delicious and nutritious, but also helpful in that manner. It has manganese, it has vitamin K, and it also has copper. So basil is really good for strong bones, healing wounds, and giving us energy. All right, so not only can it help insect bites, but it can help fight bad breath. So always put a little basil on your sandwiches. But the ingredient that I think that's going to surprise most of you is eggplant. Now, I have a little hack that I do sometimes. Some people always ask me what my favorite gluten-free bread is, and of course we made some, but some people don't want to do that. I'm telling you, if you slice up eggplant, take 2 slices and put whatever you want in between them, you're going to feel like you're eating a sandwich with a whole food gluten-free bread. So we're going to do a little something special to that eggplant, and we're going to go ahead and get started. What you're going to need is some olive oil, some toasted sesame oil, a little apple cider vinegar, and as you guys know, I always like to get the kind with the mother to really help with those digestion issues. A little salt, a little onion powder, a little garlic powder, a little dried basil too. You'll see why we're using 2 different kinds. And then some pepper and lemon juice. And I believe that should be all that we're going to need. Now, we're going to go ahead and get the eggplant started. The first thing we need to do is preheat our oven to 425. My oven doesn't take long to preheat, so I'm going to leave it off for a little bit. But 425 is what we will bake it at. You're going to need 2 shallow bowls. I already have some from this. I'll tell you about that in a minute. The first shallow bowl, you're going to add your olive oil. That's going to be 1/4
of a cup of olive oil. 1/4 of a cup of olive oil. And 1 tablespoon of sesame oil. Now when it comes to a tablespoon, I don't always measure. They say you can just give it one good swirl and that's a tablespoon. So that's what we're going to do, one good swirl. This is where a lot of the flavor is going to come from, okay? You're also going to need 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. Now because I get it with the mother, I need to give it a good shake first. Let me get my bread out of the way so I don't spill anything on it. 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. And then we're also going to need 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. I have this handy dandy little reamer that also measures. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to take my half a lemon that I already cut, and I'm just going to squeeze out 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. Let me get that out of the way. Just a little twist, press, and squeeze. And that's right out of tablespoon right there. Pour that right in. Alright. We're also going to need 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 1/4 of a teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/4 of a teaspoon of onion powder. So 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. The next ingredient is 1 teaspoon of dried basil. It's going to go right in the mix. 1 teaspoon of dried basil. Alright, and then 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. That 1/4 teaspoon back. I knew I was going to need it again. Alright. Then we're just going to take our whisk. We're going to whisk that up. We're going to need to do is get our other narrow or shallow bowl ready with our coconut flour. I might have forgotten to mention that earlier. Now I'm using coconut flour. The original recipe calls for almond flour, and it is really good either way. I recommend if you don't have a nut allergy, go with the almond flour, but I have an abundance of coconut flour right now, so I am using that. But you're going to need 2/3 of a cup. And I had a bag that was already open and down to the very end, so I already have 1/3 of a cup in here because I didn't want you to see me fighting with that bag. But I'm going to get another 1/3 of a cup real quick. So 2/3 of a cup of almond flour or coconut flour if you need this to be nut free. Or if you just, like me, and have coconut flour you need to use up. I had someone gift me some, but then I also won some, so I have an abundance right now, and it is tasty either way, I promise. So 2/3 of a cup of the coconut flour or almond flour, and then another teaspoon and 1/4 of salt. Another teaspoon and 1/4 of salt. There's 1 teaspoon, and then here is 1/4. Alright, if I'm not mistaken, that's all I need to do. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to take that spoon. Since the whisk is already wet, I'm just going to stir that up. So I'm basically going to slice up the eggplant and then dredge it in the oil and then in the flour. And by the time I get finished slicing the eggplant, I may need to give that another whisk or two, but it's really looking good. Looks like it's infusing all those yummy flavors there. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to, I've already washed my eggplant. I'm just going to cut pretty thick slices because as it bakes, it's going to soften up and we want to be able to handle it. So we're going to need, let me cut the top off and then let me kind of see what I usually do that goes in the piggy bucket. So I'm going to say maybe, that one's a little crooked. Say, I don't know, did you say that's a 1/2 inch, somewhere between 1/4 1/4 and 1/2 inch. You don't want it too thin, but you also don't want it too thick. So I'm going to get my pan out as well. And so I'm just going to slice. Now, if you can use either the smaller Japanese eggplants, and if I were using those, I would want to cut them on the diagonal to make them a little larger for my sandwich. But this is the regular, I don't know, American eggplant, and so I'm getting about a 1/2 inch slice here each time. And I wouldn't slice it quite this thick if I were using it as my bread, but not too much thinner than this. Let me see if I can give you. When I'm dealing with something round, I will cut it in half to give me a flat edge, but I want my pieces nice and round so they fit nicely on my bread. My bread that I made the other night is relatively small, as I said, so I would actually make 2 sandwiches like this to be able to have like a full, considered a regular sandwich. But I like it when a slice of tomato and a slice of the eggplant just fit perfectly on there. So I do have a small section that I want to cut out here. Looks like something wasn't quite right. Just cut that off, no big deal. And then I have all my slices here. Okay. Let's move those down. Let's get our assembly line going. Got everything set up here. I've got to have a little assembly line. And I need to get my tongs out. I like to use 1 set of tongs for each of the dredging bowls. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each slice of eggplant and just lay it softly in the oil, and then take my tongs and flip it over, and then grab it up and let it drip off just a little bit. We don't want it soaked with the oil, but we do want it nice and coated with those flavors. And then I put it in the almond flour, the coconut flour, and I just like to take my little measuring spoon or fork or something and load the flour up on it, and then kind of give it a little nudge. Then I can take those other tongs, just tap it lightly and put it on the pan. Like I said, that raw eggplant makes a great bread. So, so good. I've had several people tell me that they don't like eggplant, and like so many other vegetables, I really think it's just how it's prepared. And so I have yet to make this for anyone that did not love it. Alright, so we got 425 going. And we're going to put these in the oven for a total of 20 minutes. I'm going to do 15 on one side and 5 on the other, just to get a nice brown on both sides. Now, you can decide when they come out. They should be just about right, but if they need another 5 minutes, you can always do that. So I'm sticking mine in right now. I need to have that on bake. said 4:25. There we go. And I'm going to set my timer. 15 minutes. So now let's talk about how we want to build this sandwich. Of course, we're going to have our 2 slices of bread. That goes to the piggies. That's the end of it. We're going to have our mayonnaise that we made up. I don't know if you can see it, but this is the one we made the other night. And I just don't think any tomato sandwich is complete without a little mayo, a little salt and pepper. So we're just going to put that on each piece just to make sure it's able to stick together. Excuse me. All right. I'm going to pepper it up. Like I said, I like a lot of pepper on mine. And then I'm just going to plop down one nice slice of tomato. I actually had a little tomato earlier, so I already have it sliced up. Just going to go right there on that sandwich. I could make 2, but saving a little time here. And this is the piece de resistance. So I love basil, so I'm actually going to put whole basil leaves on my sandwich. Kind of like you might put lettuce on your sandwich. But I do want to show you something that if you're not quite ready for that much basil flavor, we can do what's called a chiffonade cut. So I'm going to take about 4 leaves. You know what? Those are the leaves I want. Let me take some other ones. Those are the ones I picked specifically for putting on my sandwich. But if you don't want that strong of a flavor, take about 4 leaves at a time, stack them on top of each other, and then give them a little roll so that you basically now have a tube of basil. And then you just take your chef's knife and you're going to slice down, keeping those fingers well out of the way. Use that claw, fingertips back, and it makes beautiful basil ribbons so that you could just sprinkle a little on there if you would like. Now, don't worry, that's not going to waste. I'll put that on my other sandwich. But in the meantime, let's get this one all ready. The hardest part about this sandwich, I think, is waiting for the eggplant to cool enough to take a bite of your sandwich. At least that's the hardest part for me. And while we're waiting on that to cook, I just want to give you guys a little bit of information. We have more virtual classes coming up. We're going to try to fill the calendar as much as possible for those that want to learn to cook from home. And so keep looking at our website, VegeCooking.com/Camden. You can also check me out on Facebook at VegeCooking Camden. Now, all we have to do is wait for that to come out of the oven. So this dish can be used many different ways. It's a great side for pasta, like if you make a spaghetti or any type of pasta, to serve these slices of eggplant on the side is phenomenal. Obviously on a sandwich is also great. Sometimes I also will take and do like a little stack, like eggplant, tomato, basil, maybe avocado, and a drizzle of balsamic vinegar. Ooh, yum. Love that. So a great side for really anything that you want to eat eggplant with. Shame on me, I totally forgot a step. So one thing that we need to do to make sure that it browns well is to give it a little squirt of olive oil on top. So got my little spritzer here, and I'm just giving it a little spritz, not a lot. Then we want to put it in the oven. And And while I've got you, let me just talk a little bit. If you want some more tasty recipes to try, we have our Tour of the Globe cookbook, recipes from Europe and the Orient and South America. This will be something you can cherish because the recipes inside can be cooked with children, whether it's your child or your grandchild. But it's VegeCooking Tour of the Globe, and they're $25. You can reach out at VegeCooking.com/Camden or on our Facebook page and ask for one of our Tour of the Globe cookbooks. Okay, we've got about 5 more minutes before we need to flip for another 5. Back at you shortly. Okay, our timer just went off, so it's time to flip. I'm going to take those same tongs and very gently, so as not to knock off the coating, we want to give them a gentle flip. Now some of the coating might fall off, and that's okay. It's not that big of a deal. We just want to be as careful as possible. One more spritz with the olive oil. And back in the oven for another 5. While that's cooking, let's talk a little bit about tomatoes. I bet you didn't know that tomatoes are a great source of vitamin C. Well, they are. Not only do they have vitamin C, but they have biotin and lycopene. So they're good for your skin, they're good for your immune system, and they're good for your bones. Tomatoes are just good for you all around. Now, while we took a short break waiting on the bake, I went ahead and I have one sandwich with the basil leaves, one with the chiffonade, because I know I'm going to need to. And what else was I going to do while I was waiting on it to bake? So, speaking of tomatoes, can be eaten raw. They can be cooked into sauces, but they can also be made into a cold soup called gazpacho. And I really like gazpacho. That's a whole nother class though. Tomatoes are actually a fruit, and the French call them pomme d'amour, which just means the love apple. And another little hidden fact about tomatoes, a lot of people associate tomatoes with Italy, but tomatoes are actually from South America. So we have this sandwich that is just chock full of nutrients here, and I am so excited to be able to build it in just a moment. It smells so good right now. Just a few seconds left. Can't wait. I'm telling you guys, this is the best tomato sandwich. It is my new staple, and I think it'll be yours too. There's my timer. Let's pull out the eggplant. Oh, so gorgeous, but it is steaming hot. So, like I said, it smells so good. The hardest part is waiting for it to cool. So I'm going to take one now very carefully. Try not to let the toppings fall off. And it is going to be softer. Just place it right there on that sandwich. Then we're just going to top the sandwich, take a bite. But not yet. We're going to let it cool just a little bit. Okay, it's been cooling. I built one. Now I'm building the other. And now for the bite. I didn't call it the best tomato sandwich for nothing. That right there is so good. I hope that you have enjoyed this recipe. I hope you enjoyed this class. I hope that you will enjoy this recipe and that you continue to learn to cook and love your veggies. Check us out at VegeCooking.com/Camden or check us out on Facebook at VegeCooking Camden. Hope to see you soon. Bye.